Breaking, chaos has erupted across Europe tonight. A message, cold, calculated and unmistakably threatening, has just been delivered from Moscow to London. Vladimir Putin has issued what officials are already calling the most direct warning to the United Kingdom since the Cold War. Within minutes, Downing Street went silent. The cabinet was summoned in the early hours. NATO command centres across Europe were placed on alert. No one saw this coming, and yet deep inside Whitehall, some are whispering that they were warned weeks ago. Something was building, something bigger than anyone wanted to admit. It began with a single encrypted transmission intercepted by British intelligence late last night. What appeared at first to be routine Russian diplomatic chatter quickly escalated into a coded threat, a message implying that if Britain continued its interference in Eastern Europe, there would be consequences not seen since 1945. The tone was unmistakable, the intent unmistakably hostile, and within hours the leak reached Parliament. What followed was pure political panic. Inside Westminster, Keir Starmer's government was already under siege. Economic pressure, migrant protests, internal rebellions, the cracks were showing. But this message from Putin hit like a thunderclap. In an emergency meeting, Foreign Secretary David Lammy reportedly slammed the intelligence report on the table and said, "If this is real, we're standing at the edge of something catastrophic." His words echoed through the corridors of power. Across the channel, NATO officials were scrambling to verify the transmission, and when confirmation came that the message had indeed originated from the Kremlin, the entire security establishment froze. By dawn, news channels were looping one phrase over and over again, direct warning to the United Kingdom. Social media erupted with fear and fury. Hashtags like hashtag Britain threatened and hashtag Cold War, two trended within minutes. Some dismissed it as propaganda and others called it a declaration of hybrid warfare. And behind closed doors, the Prime Minister was forced to make a choice: confront Putin publicly or remain silent to avoid escalation. Silence in moments like these can be deadly, but words can ignite a fire that no one can control. Sources close to NATO command in Brussels say the mood turned electric when confirmation reached the alliance's top generals. The phrase used by one insider was stunned disbelief. They couldn't understand why the Kremlin would risk such a provocation now, unless it was trying to test the unity of the West. And perhaps that was the point. Only days earlier, Britain had quietly approved new defence shipments to the Baltic states. Shipments that, according to Moscow, crossed a red line. In London, Starmer's cabinet met behind locked doors at number 10, phones confiscated, media banned. Inside that room, ministers argued over whether the UK was being dragged into a confrontation it could not win. One official reportedly shouted, "We're not America! We can't fight Russia alone." But another countered, "If we bend now, Britain loses everything." The divide was immediate, sharp and frightening. Meanwhile, the King had been briefed at Windsor. Sources say he sat in silence for over 10 minutes, staring at the intelligence summary before asking a single question. Is this how it begins? It was not a political statement, it was a human one. The same question that millions of ordinary Britons were now asking as they watched headlines flash across their screens. Outside Parliament, crowds began to gather. Some waved flags demanding defend Britain. Others called for peace, accusing the government of reckless provocation. The air was thick with confusion, anger and disbelief. How had the country that once stood as a pillar of global diplomacy become a target of the Kremlin's wrath? And why now, when Britain is already tearing itself apart from within? As daylight broke, reports surfaced of increased Russian naval activity in the North Sea. British reconnaissance planes were scrambled. Every move felt like the next spark in a powder keg waiting to explode. The Ministry of Defence issued a brief statement urging calm, but its tone was anything but reassuring. Analysts warned that Britain was entering a high-risk phase, where a single misstep, a single misinterpreted order could push the nation into confrontation. Yet beneath the official responses and diplomatic language, another story was brewing, one far darker. Intelligence insiders claim this warning from Putin may not have been about military action at all. Some believe it was a signal, a threat tied to something happening inside the UK itself. financial systems, cyber networks, energy infrastructure. The message might not have been a war threat, but a warning. We can reach you without firing a single shot. And that's when panic began to ripple through the city of London. Major banks reported sudden cyber anomalies, data lags, unexplained server spikes, digital fingerprints traced back to Eastern networks. For the first time in decades, the UK's financial nerve centre faced a shadow it couldn't see. Within a single day, Britain went from calm to crisis, Parliament was on alert, NATO was stunned, and the public was terrified. But beneath all of this, one question began to echo across the nation, whispered by generals, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. Was Putin's warning just the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that had already started quietly inside our own borders? By the following morning, London no longer felt like itself. The familiar rhythm of the city had been replaced by something heavier. The sense that every conversation was being listened to, every phone call traced, every decision monitored. Security vans circled Whitehall, police sealed off parts of Westminster, and still the government said nothing. No televised address, no reassurance, just silence. The kind that makes an entire nation hold its breath. Inside NATO's Brussels headquarters, the atmosphere was no better. Reports describe a tense video conference between British intelligence chiefs and senior NATO commanders. Screens flickered with faces from across Europe, Poland, Germany, France, the US. Then, without warning, a message appeared on the shared feed. One line of text written in Russian, flashing red. You have been warned. The room went cold. The feed was shut down within seconds, but the damage was done. Someone, or something, had penetrated NATO's secure communications in real time. That single breach sent panic racing through the alliance. Military analysts began whispering what no one dared say publicly, that Russia wasn't threatening war, it was demonstrating control. Britain, the so-called bastion of cybersecurity, had been breached at the highest level. And while officials tried to contain the chaos, public anger was beginning to boil over back home. By noon, crowds outside Parliament had doubled. Protesters waved signs reading "Defend the Kingdom" and "No to war with Russia." The clash of chants echoed through the street, one side calling for strength, the other begging for peace. The government's silence only fed the confusion. Then came the first leak. An anonymous file dropped online, allegedly from a NATO insider. It claimed that the UK had secretly authorised Operation Ashen Tide, a covert mission to disrupt Russian energy networks in retaliation for the Kremlin's interference in Baltic trade routes. If true, this meant Britain had already struck first. The story exploded across social media, and within hours, Russian state channels were using it as proof that London had crossed a line. The question was no longer, will Putin respond? It was, how far will he go? Inside number 10, Keir Starmer faced the biggest decision of his career. According to insiders, he was torn between two forces, a NATO urging him to stand firm and his own intelligence community warning that escalation would invite catastrophe. One aide described him as a man trapped between history and fear. Yet even as he deliberated, events were moving faster than his government could react. The Ministry of Defence confirmed unusual Russian military traffic in the Arctic Circle. Energy prices spiked overnight. Rumours spread that Russian-linked hackers had already accessed portions of the national grid's control system. The Home Office issued coded alerts to regional police forces. Hospitals were told to prepare for potential digital disruptions. It was as if Britain was under siege, not by missiles, but by invisible hands. Then something unprecedented happened. A second message from Moscow appeared, this time through diplomatic channels. Unlike the encrypted threat, this one was public. Putin's spokesman announced that British provocations will be met with proportional response. But what stunned observers wasn't the message, it was the timing. Within 30 minutes of the statement, the London Stock Exchange suffered a sudden 3-minute blackout. Billions vanished in data losses. Trading froze. Panic rippled through the market. Some called it coincidence, others called it a warning made visible. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles demanded to be briefed again. He reportedly questioned why the British people were being kept in the dark. Palace aides warned the Prime Minister's office that royal silence could not last forever, that the monarchy's moral voice was at risk of being drowned out by chaos and fear. For the first time in years, whispers began circulating that the king might make an unsanctioned address, not to Parliament, but to the nation itself. Across the Atlantic, Washington reacted with disbelief. President Trump publicly stated that the United States stands with Britain. But privately, US defense officials were furious that London had provoked the Kremlin without coordination. A rift was forming inside NATO, and Putin seemed to know exactly how to widen it. That evening, another leak surfaced, this time from within MI6. It revealed an internal assessment suggesting that Russia's cyber campaign may have been aided by an insider within the UK government, a double agent. The word spread like wildfire. If true, it meant the enemy wasn't just in Moscow, but it was sitting somewhere inside Westminster. Panic turned to paranoia. Cabinet ministers demanded emergency vetting, security checkpoints multiplied, phones were seized, hard drives copied, offices swept for listening devices. The image of calm government control was collapsing into open suspicion. And as darkness fell again over London, the Prime Minister's motorcade sped through the city toward a secure bunker beneath Whitehall. No press, no explanation, just flashing blue lights cutting through the fog. For those watching, it felt like a scene out of history. The moment before a nation learns it is no longer in control of its own fate. But inside that bunker, one final piece of intelligence was about to surface. A discovery that would shatter everything they thought they knew about Putin's warning. What if the threat wasn't aimed at Britain's government at all, but at the monarchy itself? And if that's true, what happens when the Kremlin's message reaches the king? Night had fallen over Britain, but no one slept. The hum of news broadcasts filled every home, every car, every pub. Headlines screamed war, warning to Britain, while anchors tried to sound calm, their eyes betraying fear. Outside, the skies were still. Inside, the nation was waiting for answers that weren't coming. Then, just before midnight, the silence broke. A new leak, not from Moscow this time, but from inside the British government itself. A classified transcript was published by an anonymous source calling themselves the Watchman. It detailed a private call between senior MI6 officials and Buckingham Palace. The transcript revealed a single devastating line allegedly spoken by a Russian operative. If the government will not listen, perhaps the Crown will? The implication was horrifying. That Putin's warning was never meant for Parliament alone. It was personal. It was directed at the king. The revelation sent shockwaves through every level of power. Inside the palace, security was immediately tightened. Intelligence teams moved in to sweep communication lines and review every royal engagement from the past month. The king's advisors were said to be deeply alarmed. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, was in crisis. He had tried to contain the situation, but now the story had escaped into the public domain. Unstoppable, uncontrollable, alive. As dawn approached, a grim pattern began to emerge. Every event leading up to this night, the intercepted messages, the cyber attacks, the financial shocks, seemed designed to build one thing: pressure. Pressure not on the government, but on the institution that still symbolised British stability, the monarchy. If the king could be shaken, if the people lost faith in the Crown's security, Britain's sense of unity could crumble overnight. NATO intelligence briefings now describe the situation as psychological warfare. Putin wasn't trying to start a physical war. He was trying to unmake Britain from within, to expose the divisions in class, power, trust that had been widening for years. The palace represented tradition, the government represented politics, and both were now caught in a trap laid by a master strategist. By mid-morning, the king made his move. Against the advice of Downing Street, he decided to address the nation. No press conferences, no political handlers. Just a simple televised message from Windsor. When the broadcast began, the country held its breath. His tone was steady, his face pale but resolute. "We have faced threats before," he said, "and we have endured. But I ask every citizen to remember, Britain's strength is not found in fear or anger, but in our unity." It was a call for calm, But to many, it sounded like a warning in itself. Online forums erupted with speculation. Was the king confirming the Russian threat? Was he signalling that the government was hiding more? Conspiracy and confusion fed off each other until truth and rumour were indistinguishable. Then another blow. Minutes after the speech, reports flooded in that a major power grid in northern England had gone dark. 500,000 homes without electricity, train systems failing, emergency sirens cutting through the night. The government called it a technical fault. But people no longer believed in coincidence. Inside NATO's London command centre, a final piece of intelligence arrived from US cyber analysts. It confirmed that the recent grid failure had been triggered remotely from an encrypted node traced back to Kaliningrad. And embedded inside that same data packet was a line of code, one identical to the message sent in the original Kremlin warning. It read simply, "This is the first." The implications were chilling. If this was the first act, what would come next? Was this a signal of escalation? Or the start of a campaign designed to bring Britain to its knees without firing a single bullet? Inside number 10, the Prime Minister's face reportedly turned white as the intelligence was read aloud. He turned to his Defence Secretary and asked, "Are we at war and no one's told us?" No one answered. Outside, sirens echoed across the capital. As the nation teetered on the edge of panic, the king made a final private request, one that would never appear in any official record. He asked for a direct line to Moscow, not through diplomats, not through NATO, but directly. "If this warning was meant for me," he said, "then I will hear it myself." The request stunned officials. No monarch had ever spoken directly to the Kremlin in such circumstances, but the line was opened. For a few tense minutes, there was only static. Then a voice, low, deliberate, unmistakably Russian, it came through. "Your Majesty," it said, "the balance of the world is changing. Britain must choose, remain a pawn or reclaim its sovereignty. This is not a threat, it is an invitation." The line went dead. No recording exists, only testimony from those present. But something changed after that call. The King's next public statement was delayed. The government refused further comment. And NATO entered what it called strategic silence. By nightfall, Britain was divided once again between those demanding confrontation and those terrified of it. Some called the King's move brave, others called it reckless. And through it all, Putin's words hung like a shadow over the nation. "You have been warned." Now the question remains, what exactly did the King hear in that call? Was it truly a warning? Or the beginning of a deal that could reshape the future of Britain itself? And if the monarchy is now part of the game, who in the end is really in control?